John, would you be willing to say a few words of welcome?
Of course, it would be my pleasure. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to February's iteration of T3 Third Thursday training. Today, I have the privilege to introduce Coordinator Laura Smith-Hill and perhaps other staff from the Center for New Americans to discuss active listening instruction. So we look forward to this afternoon's proceedings. Laura?
Thank you very much, John. I appreciate that.
Today,
Today I
am to introduce
really, I feel very excited to talk with all of you about active listening instruction.
And welcome.
And I've invited Diana to be one of our guest speakers today, so she will have a chance to share her own experience teaching active listening instruction. And this excites me because it has been a perennial question and need for professional development over the years, and something that we, our program has really honed in on as a goal for the year. So we're getting lots of opportunities for practical application of strategies in this area. And we wanted to share some of that with all of you, and I did. Certainly, when one thing I would share is that every time we look at our quarterly LACES data, we think about our active listening instruction and areas that we have to bolster our methodology. Because as we collaborate with our Best Plus Test administration trainer, who many of you have worked with in the past couple of months, we offered a refresher training with Amy Quiroga. I asked her, what are some things that students can work on to do better when it comes time for their AEL, for their post-test, their Best Plus post-test? And one that comes up every year is the student's ability for active listening. Here's a little backstory. These are pretty much all examples that I have experienced, and I thought you might relate to as well. My first one is quite humorous. It has happened repeatedly and inevitably that while in the ESL classroom myself, after scaffolding very rigorously and giving a few very concrete and culturally relevant examples, taking my time for 10 to 15 minutes, I have a student that says, "Teacher, what is this word?" The word, the very same word that I just spent 10 to 15 minutes of explicit instruction on. And that can mean a variety of things. It could be my examples, my instruction, but it also can involve our students' ability for active listening. A second example you see here is quite common. You may relate to learners routinely tuning out when other students are speaking, so that the teacher is always repeating what the students said. Now, in our online and hybridized world, we will have teachers that repeat because the students simply couldn't hear what the student was saying. But I remember many days in the regular face-to-face classroom where teachers would repeat everything every student said, which begs the question, are the students actively listening to one another? The third example, a teacher gives scaffolded activity instructions, but the students sit silently in response. That has dual sides as well. Usually I chalk it up to my scaffolded activity setup was not effective. However, it can be partly the students listening. And finally, one that I hear from our Best Plus testers in our program, an example such as a strong learner who goes into the post-test and they end up answering a why question with a what answer. So it can be the matter of just missing one word that we really thought they knew, but it sways their comprehension and lowers their score because the response was inappropriate. Does anyone else have an example from your own experience that you might briefly be willing to share that is evidence to you that your students need help with listening instruction? And if you do have an example, you can just unmute.
Laura, I would just comment that I think that this goes beyond the English language learner realm and includes all students. And I made that point to our staff in our staff meeting this morning, that I think active listening is a skill that all of our students could build, and we as instructors could also build in greater capacity, because I see the exact same things that you're talking about here with our GED level students as well, not just our English language learners. So that's my 2 cents.
Love it. Thank you, Becky, so much for saying that. I would concur. You know, I'm not the authority by any means, but I've noticed times when native English speakers struggle with active listening, and including professionals, including teachers ourselves, where we'll be in a conference session and the presenter gave us instructions. I've been in that place. Then I'm sent to a breakout room during a virtual conference, and I'm looking at the other faces going, what are we supposed to be doing in here? I missed it. So it goes both ways. There's responsibility on the part of the trainer to give lots of repetition and to even check in. What are we doing? Can you repeat what you heard? This is a professional skill. It's a college and career readiness skill. It's a soft skill, and it is like an advanced leadership skill. I'm in a really cool leadership training right now, and one of the things that came up in our last session on effective communication was that skill of saying, I heard you say this. What did you hear me say? That's a super, I just tell you, this is, yes, Becky, 1,000 times yes. We all can benefit from this. So if you're here as an ESL or an AEL teacher, GED teacher, you will find relevance, certainly. And even if you train other teachers, you will find relevance to our conversation today. Here are some selling points. Why learn to love listening instruction? Here are some reasons why to love it and why I love it. It will improve test scores, particularly for our ESL students when their test is orally based. It will teach transferable skills our learners can use daily in and out of the classroom. We will get to enjoy engaging and interactive lessons. Love that active learning versus passive learning. And we get to bask in a sense of mastery and satisfaction as a teacher, AEL, ESL, that we are improving the quality of our classroom participation, the communication of our students, and their quality of life in our communities. So lots of reasons why to love it. Oh, can everybody see the slide okay? My coloring is a little funny.
Just your titles are white.
Ah.
But I can read the rest of it.
Goodness. Okay. Well, it says overview. Identify, this is what we'll do today. Very quickly, we'll be identifying accessible sources and speakers for our listening texts. And I do use text because Dan Brusky, a colleague of ours from Minnesota, reinforced to me that a text can be verbal or it can be written, and even pictorial, that all of those can be considered a text. Number 2, we will learn 3 research-based strategies to effectively and explicitly teach listening, and finally exchange experiences with one another. I'll try to stop reading from this, and I apologize in advance that this PowerPoint has a dearth of photographic content. There are no pictures here, but the content, I promise, will be very enriching. Maybe in another life, this presentation will be more graphically appealing. This slide here says sources for listening texts. So here are a few that I noted, and I will invite you in just a couple minutes, invite all of you to share any additions that you have, because I know there are a lot of amazing resources out there. One that I like that is very low prep is an actual ESL textbook where there's a short story or a paragraph, and I just wouldn't show that to the student. I would have them listen, maybe no paper, no book. Having the students close it and just listen in is one way to have ready-made text for listening, prepared script or story, YouTube videos. One that I like too is an automated message from a community service provider, such as when we have, I put on speakerphone, a phone call into our local community health center and have the students listen to that message for practice. The next little list here before I ask for your input is ideas for speakers. We as the instructors are speakers. You and a volunteer on their own. Sometimes I let that volunteer take the reins there and have the students listen to a new voice. You and a student, if it's a dialogue and you don't have a volunteer. We had a teacher who had her spouse and her do a very short dialogue as she recorded it on her smartphone and then played that back to the students as a listening test. Jenna was her name. So credit to Jenna for that idea. A student can be the text, and it can be as simple as them answering a question about an introduction to themselves and the students listening. That can be the text, one that I've used effectively. And finally, a guest speaker is an amazing opportunity that is a little bit less controlled, but something we can be creative with. So now here are those two lists of sources and speakers for listening texts. What do you have to add to either category? And if you have ideas, and I believe that you do, please just unmute yourself and let us know what other recommendations you have.
Just one quick one. When it's two people speaking, at the lower levels, one thing that can be helpful is to do one male voice and one female voice. When they're just getting started, sometimes that differentiation, if you have two women or two men, can be a little hard. So I like the example of the teacher who recorded with her spouse, which, yeah, because it helps with the differentiation.
Thank you, Kate.
I think the one thing we use a lot of times is like that Bow Valley. So it's something we can put the pictures up so the students only see the pictures, but it has the story for the teachers to read to them.
Thank you, Diana. That's an excellent example that is pretty well leveled, right? For even lower levels of ESL, if someone has beginning level. I think another resource our teachers like to go to is Marshall Adult Ed. And that actually has a recorded version of the text.
It also has a new name.
Yes, Heather, what is the new name?
Reading Skills for Life or something. If you just Google Marshall Adult Ed, it comes up.
Is it
But
Reading
it's-
for Today? Something like
Maybe something like that.
that? Okay. Anybody else?
Laura, I saw in the chat that John said folk or holiday music.
Ooh, yes, yes. Thank you, John. Yes. I've seen some of that. Burlington has listening in each module. Thank you, Danette.
I can share, I guess. I use Unite for literacy sometimes. They're like digital books. And so you can read it, you can listen to it being read, and the voices are different on the books. And there might be really easy ones that just say sister, or there might be one with like lots of words. So you can kind of pick and choose if it works for your students.
Thank you, Heather. Okay, I am scanning through here. Becky, are you still in?
I am sorry, we're really shorthanded, so I had to stop and answer a couple of phone calls.
Oh, yeah, I understand. That's okay. I was wondering, between Diana and Becky, would one of you be available to monitor the chat and just speak up and let me know if there's something there of note?
I can, since Becky has to go in and out, I can do that.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Diana.
Diana.
Sure.
Thank you for being the chat monitor. I don't want to miss anybody's comments.
A new job for me.
Yes, thank you. So let's go to strategy number 1. We have 3 strategies that I'd like to share with you. And here is the first. Really can be a low prep strategy, but very much research-based, very effective, is setting pre-listening tasks, including pre-listening questions. Number 1, I included pre-teaching vocabulary. It's so crucial for us to take that time to listen with a critical ear to the text that we've selected and pull out any unfamiliar vocabulary for our students. Even if some of it is known to the high level, but not known to the low level, giving them a chance to review at the high, but to be exposed at the low is really important for their comprehension, obviously. Number 2, leading the students to make predictions in pairs based on the topic, the title, an image. So pre-listening prediction is really a valuable strategy here. 3 is posing a listening for just question. Here's an example. Tell me about this story. More advanced would be, what is the main topic? But that's higher level in my experience. And number 4, pose 1 or 2 listening for just questions. And there's an example that I think I misspelled. Pardon my misspelling. It's supposed to be Carlos. But it's to make sure everyone has had their coffee and is paying attention. Should have quizzed you. How long did Carlos study English before coming to the USA? Would be an example. Having them listen for just the duration of time would be an example of listening for detail. Now it's your turn. What about you? What pre-listening tests would you recommend? And if you by chance don't have anything pre-listening in addition to that list, can you tell us of one of those strategies that you use and what kind of success you've seen with it?
Laura, I guess I could share what I just did in class right before this. I had a class and we listened to some voicemails. I had 3 voicemails and people needed to change their appointment. Something was wrong with their appointment. So I said we're going to listen to these voicemails. They're talking about their appointments. So, they at least know what the context is, right? I said, just listen and see how much you can understand the first time. And then they wrote down everything they understood. And they're like, oh, I heard Friday. I heard 10 o'clock. I think I heard cancel. So I think he wants to cancel Friday at 10 o'clock, but let's listen again and see if we can get more. And, we listen. That's one thing I always do. We listen like 3 times or, many times until see how much more we can get each time. So I don't know. That's what we just did today.
Laura, you're on mute.
Oh, thank you very much, Diana. Debbie, were you the one who said that?
Yes, I was. I'm sorry. My picture's on, but my video's not. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, it was me, Debbie.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Yes, I just was lip syncing, saying a great relevant recent example. Thank you for sharing that, Debbie. Anybody else? So good. Having the students write down, I heard you say, you have had your students write down everything that they could pick up from that. It's good for those that are illiterate. Heather.
One thing I know, like Marcia Adult does this, and a lot of other like books will do this. They will have you predict with a photo before you listen or read to something. So that I do that a lot with my students. Like, what do you see? What do you think we're going to be listening to, and talking about it before we actually listen to the activity.
That's good for turning on the background information schema and all that stuff.
Wonderful. Thank you, Heather and Kate. Right on with that. I'll pop right on here to strategy 2. It says employ scaffolded repetition. Employ scaffolded repetition. And here's a few tips. Using the same content with a slightly different activity works really well with audio because the students need to hear it so many times. And I've heard that the industry standard is at least 8 repetitions for one audio text. And what I've heard from some of our staff internally has been using a really short text is best, even with higher level listeners. We can sometimes be a little taken aback at how we think that's pretty simple, pretty easy and short, but we've had teachers that are advanced and intermediate levels that have needed to make it even shorter or take it in a series. So there's only how many minutes? And do you have any feedback, any immediate thoughts on how many minutes long have you found is a sweet spot for some of the students you're working with?
Less than 2.
Excellent. Yeah. I think I've heard 2 to 3 or less from some other teachers. So thank you for sharing that. Was that again, Debbie?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, I thought I recognized your voice.
Laura, I would say even like at my level, we might have a text that needs to be 2 to 3 minutes long, but we can only listen like a minute and then digest that little tiny piece before we can go to the next minute or 30 seconds. It's interesting. We have to just really break it down.
That's helpful.
My voicemails today that we were listening to, the longest one was 40 seconds, and that was too long. We had to break it down. I mean, we listened several times, and then eventually we broke it down and paused like every few seconds to see what they actually heard.
Really good. Thank you for that. I think that's encouraging. So that's teachers that jump into it don't think that this is unusual, but can know that it's quite common to need to break it down like that.
And
This is-
especially, Laura, sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt, but
Yeah.
to all of you, do you really think that is because when we're working with these texts, the students don't have a chance to read lips, can't connect with any sort of body language and those nonverbal cues, or because that we're more working with early levels of literacy, or is it really across the learning levels?
John, for my students, sometimes it's the speed in which the language is
Oh, yeah.
spoken.
Okay, sure.
For mine, right, yeah, that's would be my first one.
That's
Okay.
what mine is too, speed. And they get caught up on a word that they're trying to process and then they're missing what's being said.
Yeah.
So I shorten it to a point where I'll read a short time and then I'll analyze that part and say, is there any of the words you didn't understand? Then we will go over it again. Because if they don't understand what the word means, just what the rest of what is being said.
Yeah, Jennifer, that seems like a really important point, even in my own language acquisition personally, where I had teachers, no, just don't get myopically focused on that word or that grammar point and listen at a higher level and absorb. Yeah, huh. So I'd be curious how we can explicitly address those student inclinations or student preferences.
Thank you for that.
I'm not sure who this Cornerstones is, but they said ReadWorks offers different speeds. And I found that too. Some of the things I find to share, I can lower the speed to 3/4 of the speed or half of the speed that's normally spoken. So doesn't always work, but yeah.
I think one of the teachers present here introduced me to the reality that YouTube could also, I think, Sarah, you taught me that YouTube can have the speed adjusted. So that's been a game changer for me.
Heather just said that we use that Standout series from the National Geographic, and that one too, speed adjusting in the listening exercises. So I think look for that tool. It's pretty cool.
Thanks, everybody. Fantastic. So the top of this slide says strategy number 2, employ scaffolded repetition. This is an example of what it might look like and it may relate to some things that you've done, but this helped me to conceptualize what it would look like to do the same audio text repeated every day of the week if we met 4 days, Monday through Thursday. And you may have a different teaching schedule than that, but if I was teaching one listening text that was 2 minutes long or less to a high beginning group, this is the type of approach I would use, and it's quite transferable to any level of instruction, including native English speakers, but especially with ESL when they need probably 8 repetitions to master one audio text. So this is pretty scaffolded. You see that each day I would begin with vocabulary, pre-teaching or review in pairs preferably. Then I would go to, like on day 1, doing a prediction like Heather was saying with an image or using the title of something and having having the students predict what the story will be about or the text will be about. This is a method I learned, I believe it was from Betsy Parrish, to include prediction in pairs before listening to the text. And then after listening, having the pairs turn together and check again, having everyone listen another 1 or 2 times to that audio text. Again, check with their partner before being exposed to that vulnerability open class, if and when you can, and then checking as a group. So then the second day, it would be a question for gist. The third day, 1 or 2 detailed questions. And on day 4, I included a different type of activity, of which I'm sure there are many, but one that I enjoy is a close activity where you'd have the text typed out on a handout with some information gaps for the students to listen and listen and listen. Again, working with a partner to check, listening again to see if their predictions were right. So this is one way that other researchers have talked about doing a lot of scaffolding and repetition with just one audio text. What about you? What else do you do to ensure plentiful, scaffolded repetition in your listening instruction? Are there things that you saw on the previous slide that you do and you've done with good results? Or something else that you've done to ensure scaffolds and repetition for your students? Feel free to put it in the chat or to just unmute and share your thoughts on repetition. Does anybody use a similar methodology of repeating for more than one day? Has anyone needed to do a listening activity in more than just one lesson?
Danette says they review the BE vocabulary sheet words multiple times.
I always start each day as a review from the day before and to go over the words and see if something's come up that I had a question about after class was over. So it keeps it fresh in their mind.
That's strong. Thank you.
Laura, did you put "what about you" on there on purpose?
Yes.
That trips up everybody on the Burlington English. Oh, what about you? I drove here today. What about you? And just saying "what about you" a lot in class might be helpful.
Yes. Yep.
Because it's not something that they, I don't know, it just throws a lot of people off at least the first 2 or 3 times they take best. So I like that you said, "and what about you?" I try to say that more because it's not usually the way I ask people questions.
Yeah, I intentionally, and there may be others in this room, I'll call it a room because it's a Zoom room. There may be others in this room who intentionally use "what about you" and "tell me about this picture" with students because they're going to need to have a listening comprehension of that if they are tested with Best Plus.
Heather also said we use the NYC Speaks series, and when we do, we need to go over vocabulary multiple times. She tries to elicit meanings and review of the storyline before listening to the videos.
Oh, yes. Thank you for mentioning that, Heather. I think I remember you and some of the other advanced teachers using that video on, gosh, what was the topic? Something about work. And it seemed like it was a lesson that continued over much more than one day, that they needed to keep seeing that video over and over. Am I getting that right?
Heads are nodding.
Heads are nodding. Thank you, Diana, for being the head nodding monitor as well as the chat box monitor.
Yes.
Heather says yes, thank you. Thanks for the verbal.
Jennifer said, I use "what is happening in this picture" whenever one comes up. So that's surprising.
Nice. Yeah. Nice strategies for visual text reading too. Now this slide says strategy 3, conversation moves. This might ring a bell to some of you because it's a strategy that we learned at Summer Summit 2021 in a session called Talk Amongst Yourselves with Andrea Eckelberger. And I believe she got it from some of her colleagues and even from a book about teaching active, engaged lessons. It was called Conversation Moves, and here's some tips. This can be used with any lesson. It can be used any day of the week. Very little prep is required of the teacher to use this approach, but student training is required. I would recommend repeating the activity often so the students become trained in how to do this as a familiar activity with different content in different units. And this is what it looks like. They're can be 2 or more conversation partners in this conversation moves activity. First, a student chooses a question to answer, or the teacher can ask a student the question. 2, another student summarizes what that student said. So I really, really appreciate the conversation moves approach for getting students attuned to what one another are saying, to leverage those moments for active listening instructional opportunity instead of students just tuning out because, oh, the teacher's not talking, I'm going to rest my brain, which is completely understandable because of how much work it is when they are all cylinders firing, learning another language. But that's also a rich opportunity for being held accountable for listening by being asked to summarize he said, she said, or they said. We do on occasion have a student in the classroom who can't tell if that's a man or a woman from their Zoom image or the lack of image. They might have their camera off, so it helps for them to be able to say they and PC in nature to do that. The third is another student asks follow-up question. That one is more advanced, but some of you may have experience with that as well. That can be very rich. This is a great skill for native speakers. Very, very strong skill and a professional development skill by my estimation. Here, what about you? I can give an example. What about you? Can you give an example of a time that you've used conversation moves or something like it with your students?
We did that today. We were just talking about your favorite food. And I would ask one of the students, what's your favorite food? And then a different student, I would say, what is so-and-so's favorite food? What did she say? As they try to teach them how to do this activity. So we were started to practice that. Just something simple. What's your favorite food?
Some of my favorite examples of this were from a citizenship class that I was teaching. And I would do a short activity, maybe 10 minutes long as a warm up or a mid-class activity. I ask a question or I train the students to ask each other the question. And it can be something as simple as, what will you do this weekend? Or introduce yourself, tell your name, your native country, and how long you've lived in the US. And sometimes I added, why do you want to become a US citizen? Something that they'll need to respond to at the naturalization interview. But I tell them as a warning, students, please listen to another student. I will ask you to summarize. I saw a night and day difference from when I never held them accountable to summarize each other's statements to the time that I did let them know in advance, you'll be asked to summarize. They were gripped. They were riveted, listening carefully. They would ask for repetition. Can you say that again? Because they knew they missed something. So I found it to be highly effective with some advanced learners I was working with. Does anyone else have similar experiences or results?
Rhonda shared in the chat, this is great for listening skills because some students stop listening and begin to think about what to add. And oftentimes it has already been shared.
That's a good one, Rhonda. Thank you for sharing that.
With my high level students, I use the, is there anything you can add to so-and-so's answer? And so they know not to repeat the other person's answer, but they're adding to it. And so then we get kind of a fuller conversation going. It can be kind of fun sometimes.
I could share more base. I usually teach like pretty basic and low beginner students. And so as something that we can do at our level, say I have on the screen like coffee and tea, and I say, Laura, do you want coffee or tea, or what do you want to drink? And then Laura can say, I want coffee. And then I say, oh, Diana, what does Laura want? And she can say, Laura wants coffee. Or I'll say, does Laura want tea? And Diana has to say, no, Laura doesn't want tea. She wants coffee. It just, they have to listen to the previous person. They don't know who I'm going to call on to ask about them. So that helps a little.
We do that a lot.
Excellent. Thank you. That is really excellent. I love these tips. Diana, would now be an okay time for you to get ready to share your example? So I've invited Diana to share here something that she's done with her students, and she has an example from her lesson materials to show. I think you're muted.
When I share, it says it's going to stop your sharing. Just so
No
you
problem. You
Okay.
go right ahead.
This is something that Sarah helped create for our Oral 2 packet. And this is what we taught off of. So we taught them first the English words that they would have to say. We were talking about shopping. And we were talking, the theme of the lesson was workforce. So they were going to practice being the salesperson, and someone else was going to be coming in asking questions. So we taught all of these words. We talked about where to find it. We talked what that meant, like what did discount mean, right? Versus, and what was material and sales tax. We just talked about all those things and built their schema and their understanding. And then we went, let's see if we'll go here. Yep. And then we put the pictures together and we had the little numbers on it, which then we had to go back and show them, oh, this is number 1. So this is number 1. If you don't remember, you can go back. But as we try to learn the conversation. And then we put the numbers here. This was a lot of fun teaching, like, okay, you can ask 5, 6, and 7, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. So they had to do some thinking. They had to do their own choices. We didn't have all the words written out for them. They had to think about the word they had just learned. So what's the sales price? And then the other person would have to give the answer. And then we got down to, are you sure? And then they would say, yes, look on the price tag, right? So it got to be this conversation back and forth. The listening came in is because the speaker who asked the question could choose anything. So they weren't just going to go straight down the line. Like when you have a conversation, you have it listed, sales sign. They couldn't say what's the sales sign. They had to think differently. So this was a lot of fun. As the students got more familiar with this took us about 2 weeks to get full good conversation. And then we started getting intonations in the voice. Are you sure? Yes. You know, they got a little bit like confident in their sounds, you know. So they would even then like change the size, or they would come up with a different price. But they really liked this because it was authentic practice. If they had to ask for help in the clothing store, or if they were going to be the salesperson. Do you have any questions about how we brought this about? Like I said, it took a while to train, to teach the words, teach the schema. And then it took just as long for them to figure out this conversation. what was fun is when we took the conversation words away from them and all they had to look at were the pictures. So then it was all memory. Just the pictures gave them. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, that's what we did, January.
Thank you, Diana.
Yeah,
Looks like fun. Thanks for sharing.
bet.
Thanks, Dana. So there's a few comments in the chat. I'm not sure we were completely caught up on.
We are.
Are we?
Got it. Yep. Mhm.
Okay, thank you, Diana.
Yeah.
Awesome. I didn't know if there were more while you were chatting. Great. Now with the last few minutes, and we'll be done by the hour, on the hour, if not a little sooner. If we can, and I think I can, put you in breakout rooms, I can share this, and I think I can share it in the breakout rooms too, my teachers tell me. Would like you to recap what we talked about today and add any of your own examples in conversation with each other. Here is this is the overview, a review of what we talked about today. Resources, sources, and speakers. What kind of speakers you use for listening, what resources you use, what kind of texts. Number 2, the 3 research-based strategies that we talked about today. So you can remember those together, try to name the 3 that we covered, and then exchange any other ideas, tips that you have, challenges, and workarounds that you've come up with. Okay, and I'll put you into breakout rooms for about 6 minutes. And thanks for your camera. We have a teacher, Susan, at our school too. So I saw your name and I thought, oh, I wonder who teacher Susan is. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to chat with each other. I want to invite any of you to share a takeaway that you had in your conversations. Was there something that your conversation partner shared that stood out to you that you can elevate for the good of the group?
My conversation partner noted how, especially with the demographics they serve at Job Corps, how important it is to foster or cultivate a classroom dynamic that's supportive, safe, and nurturing. That it's so important to have that rapport so that students are willing to engage, whether it's speaking, listening, or interacting.
Thank you, John. Thanks for sharing that. Listening is such an honoring act. So when students feel like they're being heard by each other, that helps to foster that sense of safety and belonging that we value in our adult learning environments.
I think the one thing my students have learned is that they have to actually say the other person's name. So it does build community, because they don't know no one knows who is supposed to do the answering if you don't tell me that you're talking to me. So that's been very interesting as well.
I know there's such a rich experience here. Anybody else willing to share?
We didn't have that much time to talk. I had to talk most of it instead of being able to listen.
Well, that's good feedback. Are there others that feel like you could have used more time to talk together? Yes. Oh, that's good news. That's good news. So in the future, we'll build in a little more time for that conversation. Awesome. Wonderful. What are your thoughts on this topic? Did you feel like this was a valuable topic based on your work with your students?
I thought it was really well done. I mean, there are things I just, maybe touched on in class, but, for the listening part, I know it's important, but, just to realize that students sometimes tune out other students, or like they say, thinking ahead what they want to say or whatever, I guess I've been kind of lax in that, not realizing that that could be a problem. So, excuse me.
Thank you, Dwayne. That's a good observation. How many times I'm in a training and I'm reminded of, don't be thinking about your answer when someone else is talking. Don't be jumping ahead to that. Try to be really present with their content. It's not as easy as it sounds. I think we all can have a penchant to do that. You have all done a beautiful job today. Thank you for participating. And it was really my honor to talk with you about this topic and to give you some space to exchange ideas. In the future, I'll be sure to add more extensive opportunities for you to share with each other when there's a topic that's this meaningful to you. Becky, John, closing comments.
Laura, just thank you. I'm sad that I had to be a little bit in and out during this presentation, but that allows me to remind you all that we do record these presentations. So the recording will be available on the South Dakota All website, probably not until sometime next week, because it takes a little time to download, but you can also go there to find past T3 trainings. So don't forget to take a look at the South Dakota All professional development page for the links to those trainings. And this one will be coming soon. And I appreciate you so much. Laura, you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, Diana for sharing your classroom examples, and everyone else for sharing their experiences and input. I think it was great.
Mm-hmm. Here to that. I concur wholeheartedly. And it's real validating because it's just more evidence of great professional development, but really when you're sharing your perspectives, I can see how compassionate, how professional, research-driven approaches, using realia, helping our learners connect and make meaning in real world situations. So kudos to all of you. Keep up the great work and enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thanks, everyone.